Hi. So there's a lot going on in this world right now, and I'm sorry for not being able to post for the last few weeks. It's been tough, and I hope you can understand. So today we will start talking about cost curves. There's a lot that entails in cost curves, lots to talk about. So I'll probably break this video apart. Let's jump to it. So cost curves, right? There's a lot of calculus that goes behind it. We'll focus on average variable cost now and average fixed cost, and then kind of mesh everything up together so that we can understand the relationship between all these different curves. So if we start looking at the average variable cost, on our x-axis we have our quantity, right? And so how to calculate average variable cost is, it measures the variable cost per unit of output that you have, right? So you'll have, in the numerator is like this variable cost function. Divide that by the output. Right? So the more you increase your output, you see that your variable cost will also increase. That's why it's not always a linear average variable cost. That's why it always kind of increases. It just keeps increasing. The curve just increases, right? And so that is the relationship between average variable cost and output. Now, if we look at average fixed cost, right? It's kind of like if you look at the formula, right? It's this function of average fixed cost, but that fixed cost is a constant number, right? You purchase a truck for your business. It's $1,000, let's say, hands down. That's it, right? But now, as you increase the cost, as you increase your output, as you increase the denominator, you see that that cost is being kind of like distributed. It's being balanced, and the more you increase your denominator, you see that your overall cost will kind of decrease, right? So if it's like 1,000 divided by 2, right? Let's say this is 2. Okay, 1,000 divided by 3, 1,000 divided by 4, 1,000 divided by 5, and so on and so forth. You will see that it's kind of decreasing. So that is what we see here. So one thing to notice about these two is that average fixed cost and average variable cost, right? These kind of go hand in hand. In any purchase that you make, there will be an average, a fixed cost, and a variable cost, right? And when you add those two together, fixed cost plus variable cost is equal to your total cost, right? Total cost, when you're trying to buy something in a company, that has like two components, the fixed cost and the variable cost. So now, in the same theory, right, same concept, average variable cost plus average fixed cost is equal to average total cost. So to kind of combine everything together, right, here is maybe a new term that we don't know. This is called the marginal cost, right? This is the marginal cost. This is the change in your cost that you get if you add an additional unit of output, right? So if you add one more unit, right, to your company, one more of like cookies or something, batch of cookie, what is that additional cost? What does that cost you? That additional piece, that is your marginal cost. Okay, so if you know calculus, if you like calculus, you can think of it as the derivative of the total cost, right? If it's the change, it's a change in cost per additional unit of output. So that is the marginal cost. Right? And I will go more in depth as to why it's kind of curving down and curving up. But if you just look at how I learned it is just by staring at that graph for a really long time, finding relationships. And I think that's the best way to learn. So this one, right? Here's our total cost, and here's our average total cost and our average variable cost. We normally don't put the average fixed cost down, mostly because it doesn't really have much of an effect when we're doing computations in the future. So if you have the average variable cost, I would assume that you already know a lot about average fixed costs, right? Because this difference between the two, right, that gap between the two is the average fixed cost. Why is that? Because like I said, right, average variable cost plus average fixed cost, that combined gives you that U shape. So one more thing to kind of focus on is the relationship between marginal cost and average variable cost and average total cost, right? Because they kind of pretty much go hand in hand. If you see it, look at this and look at this point, right? That is when the average total cost is touching the marginal cost, right? But that also happens when average total cost is at its minimum and average variable cost is at its minimum. So they are going to touch each other. Average total cost and marginal cost, they're going to touch each other when average total cost is at its minimum, right? Same thing goes with average variable cost. One more thing to see is that if you see that when average total cost, right? Or when the marginal cost, because this is a marginal cost curve, when that is lower than, when that is underneath the average variable cost, when this is underneath the average variable cost, what do you see about the variable cost? The variable cost is actually decreasing. When you see, again, right, and you also see that average total cost is decreasing, right, until this point, right, because here, if we look at, right, this is underneath the average total cost, and that's when the average total cost is decreasing. Same thing over here, right, when the marginal cost is above the average variable cost, what do we see about the average variable cost? It's increasing. Okay. And then again, when the marginal cost is above the average total cost, what happens to average total cost? Oh, it's increasing. You must be asking, okay, why is that? Why are we having this relationship? How I would explain it is, think of it this way, right? Let's say that the average test score in a classroom is 70%. Okay, that's probably average. So 70%, the average is 70%. Now, another student adds their test score, and that person got a 90%, let's say. Okay, so that person, I would say that, think of that 90% as my marginal cost, right? It's a random example. Think of that 90% as a marginal cost, and the average, right? Average total cost or whatever was 70%. What is happening? What happens to the average when that 90% drops into that data? What happens? That average will increase, right? Now, same thing, same intuition. Let's say that we have a list and that average is 70%. Now, another student adds their data, right? An additional cost, an additional score adds to the data, and that person got a 20%, a bad test, right? 20%. What happens to the average? Right now, we see that the marginal cost is underneath our average total cost. So what happens if that 20% comes in? Obviously, the average is going to decrease. And that is why we see that relationship, right? When it's underneath, that average decreases. So think of it as like an average versus, if you added an additional cost, an additional like score, blah, blah, blah. So that really covers it all. So this is what I wrote in my bubble. That just shows like, okay, what is happening, but I wanted to kind of explain why it's happening. So yes, thank you so much for watching.